As far as I'm concerned, this is easily the most interesting watch Zodiac makes. Don't get me wrong, Zodiac makes some fantastic divers, but so does everyone else. But no one has anything else quite like the Olympus. Technically, it is a dress watch, and it is one with a rather sleek and sexy profile. But this one is a little more fun and funky than classically sophisticated, and I think that's something you'll see for yourselves. In terms of the specs, you're looking at a 37mm wide case without and 37.5mm with the crown. Or not actually the crown, but these little wingtips that are on either side. But however you look at it, it's a smaller case with a shorter lug-to-lug of 45mm, meaning just about anyone can wear this one, even someone with a pretty slender wrist. Total thickness is 11.2, and that's from the closed case back to the tip of the domed sapphire crystal. Although, thanks to its Manta Ray case shape, it has an even slimmer look than that. Seriously, check this thing out. It is sexy and cool as hell. Now, rounding out the specs, the Olympus also has 50 meters of water resistance, is powered by a Swiss STP 1-11 movement, and for better or worse here, it has a 19mm lug width, which is one of my few and probably biggest complaints when it comes to the Olympus. And that's just because I have so many other 20mm straps already, and I can't use any of them here. But I like the Olympus enough that I actually went and bought a whole set of 19mm straps for it, and you'll see those throughout the review. In the watch world, the Olympus is a bit of a sleeper. Not many people know about it, but it's actually one with a bit of history. The original Olympus was introduced way back in 1961. And while it was a design that was fitting for the age, it didn't quite make it to the 70s. Style, as well as a whole lot of other things, changed by that point. However, when Fossil was resurrecting the Zodiac brand, they started looking through their back catalog for inspiration. And inspiration they found. So in 2018, they brought the Olympus back. I wound up seeing one a while ago, and just loved it. It was so unique, and it wound up being one of those watches that just stuck with me. One that was always in the back of my mind, and one that I was always thinking that I should go out and buy. Until last November, when I finally gave in. And once I got it on my wrist, it did not disappoint. As that slim 37 by 45mm case wears exactly like you'd expect. And on my 7¼ inch wrist, it was extremely comfortable. Now, even though this is a smaller watch, it has quite the presence thanks to its case shape, as well as the beautiful dial and vibrant second hand. It's thin enough to easily wear as a dress watch, yet interesting enough to wear whenever you want. And speaking of the case, let's talk about that for a minute. This is often referred to as a Manta Ray style case, or sometimes I've actually heard it referred to as a Batman case, as it kind of looks like a squished version of the Dark Knight's logo. And personally, I'm good with either description. Both are cool. And knowing that this design originated in the early 60s, you could say that it also has that classic retro sci-fi feel to it. Which is something that I think it shares with the Hamilton Ventura, another watch I've been obsessed with over the years. But one thing I love about the Olympus that the Ventura doesn't have is symmetry. It's unusual, but there's an order to it. As well as there's just this really cool sleekness to it. Hopefully I can really capture this on camera, but if you look close at the case, you can actually see that the edges of the case, these wings of the Manta Ray, they're very slim and cut out from a larger piece of steel. And then the case itself expands out as you get to the middle, where you have the case back and the crystal. And that slick, streamlined design is even more accentuated by the long chamfers running down each side, on what is otherwise a brushed case. Which I think when you pair that with a polished bezel creates a nice balance overall, making a mostly casual watch with just enough flash to keep it interesting. Now, flipping the watch over, you can see that it also has a standard closed case back, one that is secured with 4 small screws. And speaking from experience, not with this watch, but another one, that if you ever have to take a case back like this off, be very careful with those screws, because if you lose one, you're probably screwed. Back to the front and over at the upper right is a signed crown, which is tucked up into those little wings, And because of that and its smaller size, it is a little bit hard to get a hold of at times. Not only is it a little harder to rotate, but this is one of those that you're going to have to use your fingernail to pop out. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Then, topping everything off, is a beautiful domed sapphire crystal. Just perfect for this retro design. But it is here where we run into another small issue, and that issue is glare. Between the crystal and the reflective dial, the Olympus picks up a lot of glare. Currently, there are 4 different versions of this 37mm Olympus. I think there were a few other limited editions before that, but currently there's only 4. And this ocean blue version I have is the newest. Although, as a side note, they recently introduced a slightly larger 40mm version. And this one is more of a field watch or sports watch. It's definitely an interesting option, but I still like this Olympus better, a lot of which is due to that quirky Quadrant dial. Try saying that 4 times fast. With this one, the dial has this beautiful reflective steely blue coloring. I'm not exactly sure it's going to come across through the camera, but in person it's stunning. It's a quadrant style dial, meaning that the dial is divided in 4 parts, and the finish alternates between those, between a sunburst pattern and a circular radial pattern, helping to define those quadrants even more. Now, sometimes this effect is pretty subtle, but sometimes it's also very obvious. It all just depends on the light, but when you catch it, it's certainly interesting. Then, on top of that, you've applied polished indices, a polished framing for the date, and a white painted chapter ring right at the outer edge where the dial seems to slope back a little bit. For hands, the Olympus uses a simple flat polished lance hand set, as well as this really bright vibrant stick second hand. Just under the 12, you have an applied logo, as well as some additional branding, and then simply the word automatic at the bottom. The branding at the top may be a little too much here, at least for such a small area, but at least they kept the bottom half relatively clean. Then, going further down, you see the ever-important Swiss-made logo in a very minuscule font. One pretty interesting aspect about this particular colorway, and it separates it out from all the other Olympus colorways, is its choice of using this really light blue aqua for highlights. It's there for the word automatic, the second hand, as well as the date. And when I was trying to decide which colorway I wanted to buy, this is one thing that gave me pause. I wasn't sure if I wanted it or I'd like it, and especially compared to, say, just the straight black version. So as I was pondering this over, I decided to email the one person I knew who had seen all 4 colorways. And that's Mark over at Long Island Watch. He's recently become an authorized dealer. So I sent him a message asking out of the 4, which one did he like the best? And he replied back with this blue version. So I took a chance. And in the end, I think I made the right decision. Now, compared to the others, I think this one probably has the worst contrast. So those others may be more readable. But I think this one is far more interesting. Plus, I already have a good black and a good champagne dialed watch that I love. So with this one, there's no overlap with those. The bright light blue on the date does help with its readability, but I think in the end it's a little more distracting. Whereas the second hand, I've actually come to really appreciate. It's also a little distracting, but I think it also helps draw you in. It's a little mesmerizing to see go around. Now, as cool as this dial is, there is a bit of a functionality issue here, especially when you compare it to some of the other standard dress watches out there. Because of the glare, because of the hands that they're flat, thin, and polished, those hands at times can be hard to make out. It really just depends on the conditions. Some colorways may be better than others here, but with this one, the blue dial version, it is a little bit of an issue, and especially in lower lit conditions. And I think that's something that the newer field watch versions shouldn't have an issue with, as they're using a texture dial and a completely different handset. And I have one more critique about the design, the date position. I know, I talk about the 6 o'clock a date way too much. But come on, with this case design, I think it makes more sense here than any other watch I've looked at. With those wings at the top, everything's just leading down. Anyway, as for the movement, this is using an STP 1-11. which is another ETA 2824 Swiss-made clone, just like the Solitas. And it's sort of in-house-ish here. Sort of. If you didn't know it, Fossil is actually the parent company of both Zodiac and STP. STP is kind of their Swiss-made movement shop. So in the grand scheme of things, it is all under that same umbrella. But more importantly, it's just a good movement these days. I think some of the earlier STP movements had some issues, but as far as I know, that's been worked out. Another thing I have mixed feelings with here is the strap the watch came on. Originally, it came with this matching blue strap, and overall, it does seem like a good leather strap. It's a nice, soft, and supple leather, but because of its finishing, I think I was noticing indentations from the buckle quite easily. Minor thing, but more importantly, I'm just not sure it's a good fit for the watch. With this dial, with this case, you need something with more contrast, something just as equally interesting as the watch itself. So I ordered a few 19mm straps to try out on this one. And in the end, I think this one is my favorite. I just love how this looks on this two-tone leather. It's interesting and helps that blue dial really pop. So Zodiac, take note here. With regard to value, MSRP is $895 US. And from what I've seen, expect to pay just about that much, as I haven't found too many gray market Zodiac dealers out there. But if you're looking for a regular dealer I'd recommend, I'd say go to Mark over at Long Island. Not that he needs the free plug at this point. As far as the price, I'd say value is okay here. I mean, at this price and below, there are a ton of options out there. And if you're just focused on getting a classic, clean, well-made dress watch with good specs, I'm positive you could find a better deal out there. And I think that becomes even more apparent when you really start to nitpick this one, where you really start to focus in on those flaws. The tiny crown, the glare, the hard-to-read hands, bringing up the eternal form versus function argument, and say that Zodiac is too focused on being different here than usable. And as a reviewer, that's something I would advise you to think about. Yet, for me, personally, despite all of those issues, I wouldn't change a thing. I have zero regrets with the Olympus. I love this thing. Flaws and all. And in a lot of ways, those flaws make it a perfect watch for me, as it's a perfect representation of what I really want out of my own collection, where I'd love to have one or maybe two watches of a particular brand, ones that are a little different, yet still beautiful and interesting to look at, and at the same time be a great representation of what's interesting about the brand. And for Zodiac, I think the Olympus does that. Now, bottom line, the Olympus isn't going to be for everyone. It's not a watch with a lot of mass appeal. It's funky, it's quirky. For a lot of people, it's just going to be too different. Yet, if you're like me, and you're looking for something that's a little different, a little outside the box, a little fun, a little funky, then I think the Olympus is worth checking out. But what do you think about the Zodiac Olympus? Is it something that appeals to you, or would you have gone for something else? Let me know down below. As well as if you know what watch I'm wearing, mention that down below as well. Trying something a little different here. And as always, you guys know what to do down below. Like, comment, subscribe, thumbs up, thumbs down, something. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.